Hey guys, Coven here back with another video. Today we're going to be doing the second episode of my RTA Draft Guide series where we're going to be covering Laia. So I think Laia is a really strong unit in the meta right now, and being able to know how to play with and against her is going to be an important part of any climb you're planning on doing this season. So hopefully this video teaches you a little bit of something about drafting Laia in this current meta. So you can see here we have the Laia first pick, prebans of Ran and Pyrrha on my side. These are my prebans always as first pick because my first priority when I'm first picking the draft is looking to play more aggressively. And then I think second pick, you're going to run into these prebans like 90% of your games because these two units feel basically impossible to beat as second pick. So a lot of people will just opt to preban those. And in this scenario, of course, we've taken the first pick Laia because I think she becomes the best unit in the game with these kind of prebans. And a lot of the time, the response you're going to fight is Death Dealer Ray plus a Tywin because these two units pair so well together and can do really well into something like a Laia first pick because they can, the way you can stagger debuffs with this unit where you proc the Laia Sweet Miracle turn 1 and then you can just rip all your buttons turn 2 and she won't have Sweet Miracle. So if you sleep her, stun her, she's not going to be able to cleanse that, and then you can kind of just take advantage of her team. I think these two units are should always be your go-tos and will always be what you fight when you're first picking Laia. So looking at how you respond to this, basically it's pretty much always going to be mitigation plus a cleanser like Moon Bunny. Most of the time, I would suggest putting mitigation on 3 because being able to guarantee you have some form of mitigation in a game is really strong. But sometimes like to put the Moon Bunny on 3 because when you put Moon Bunny on 3, you've kind of guaranteed DDR is going to get off very little injury in the draft because either he presses skill 3, my Moon Bunny Dominion gets the cleanse, the immunity, and the skill nullifier, and then he can't injure me at all. Or he presses skill 2. If I can boost my Crimson Armin up, she can put up the immunity, and then he's not going to get off as much injury. So you're kind of forcing the DDR's hand to go either more into debuffs or pivot to like a more kind of standard injury style with something like an ML Shoe. And I think that's what a lot of people will do. They'll pick something like ML Shoe here on the 3 pick protection because she doesn't need any debuff to pretty much max injury unit turn 1 or turn 2. So people will pick something like a Shoe, and then a lot of people like to pick an extra turn opener like a Narco here because they've kind of threatened my Moon Bunny's usefulness because if Knock S3, she'll proc the Moon Bunny, but then DDR can just S3 after that and strip the skill nullifier plus immunity. So I end up getting debuffed anyways, even though I've picked Moon Bunny. So they're kind of threatening that if I'm not careful in the draft, they can just make my Moon Bunny completely worthless in the draft. So what I like to do here is I like to pick units that can play well with Moon Bunny's first cleanse. So I like to pick something like a Savior Aiden plus the Navy Captain Landy because I think these two units can do really well into my opponent draft because Landy usually would struggle into a knockall, but once knockall rips her skill 3, procs my Moon Bunny, she can't be slept by something like a Death Dealer Ray, and she's not bound, so she can still get the counters, the Elbrus, charge up her skill 3, and if I high roll the game, like Landy can just solo win the game by herself. And then Aiden is a similar story where she doesn't do well into something like a Death Dealer Ray usually, but me cleansing or not me the Moon Bunny cleansing the Narcos S3, and then if I dodge, I just get a counter off, get attack buff, push up, and then I can one shot a unit like Ray or Urban Shadow Shoe since I do run her on very high damage build with Sword of Cycling Seasons. A lot of people will be scared of something like Aiden. And then here we really see the strength of first pick, right? Because I got to pick basically the strongest unit in the game, and then I've picked 2 counter picks on 4-5 to play with my 3 pick protection, and I get to ban whatever my opponent responds with on the 5 pick slot. So let's say he picks something like a Malona and he's looking to ban Savior Aiden. I just get to ban out his 5 pick and I still get my candy through the draft. So first pick really is really strong with how it can play to just play against your opponent's top 4 and ban last, and then you get first choice of whatever you want in the draft. So I hope this is showing you how you can play first pick Laia against 2 of, I would say, her strongest counters in Def Deloria and Ambitious Tywin. And in the next game, we're going to cover playing Laia from a second pick perspective. So in this second game here, we're going to cover playing Laia into something like a Def Deloria first pick. You can see the prebans have changed where I always preban like this as second pick. And then this Gloomy Rain is supposed to represent Numa Luna, but unfortunately the draft simulator doesn't yet let me do duplicate pre-bans. So just imagine this is Numa Luna here. So what a lot of people like to do is they'll pre-ban something like a Narwhal, because I think when Narwhal is pre-banned, a unit like Laia becomes slightly less priority than something like a Death Dealer Ray, and then they'll pre-ban like an opener like the Numa Luna as well, and then they'll first pick Death Dealer Ray, saying, are you going to give me Laia Death Dealer Ray, or are you going to take Laia in a disadvantageous matchup? And I think the answer is always to take the Laia anyways, because fighting Laia DDR without something like a Narwhal and without any openers up, unless you go like a Rand draft or a Payro draft, is it can be really, really hard to do as like a turn two player. So what I like to do is I'll take Laia and then I'll take pretty much DDR's best friend in the Atywin, because I think Atywin is a really strong unit right now because he brings so much utility. Like if DDR, if I let's say DDR presses S3 and I get to cleanse it, then my Atywin can just pretty much CC lock the DDR. He gets the S3 with the provoke, or sorry, with the stun and the defense break, or I could S1 and provoke him, and then DDR or Ambitious Tywin can also be like an Aureus holder on protection set and bring mitigation as well. So this, I think this is a really good response into something like a DDR first pick. And from this plot, a lot of people will look to play like a more aggressive style draft around something like a Navy Captain Lanny. So what I've seen some people do is they'll go for something like Conqueror Lilius, and then they'll put the Navy Captain Landy on 3-pick protection. So they're pretty much setting up to go like a solo Landy draft, and then pick two units on 4/5 that pair really well into something like a Navy Captain Landy. And what I like to do here is I'll pick my own solo carry on 3. So I like to go Malona here because I think she's pretty much a 1-for-1 counter into Landy, and with proper drafting, it should be really, really hard to lose unless like Landy's literally S-ing you turn 1 for you to lose. And then I'll pair it with something that I think is really, really good into this draft and not picked as much, which is the Ocean Breeze Luluka, because sure, you can pick something like a Moon Bunny, which can do a job against Conqueror, but I mentioned in the previous draft how when they have double extra turn openers, it can be really hard for something like a Moon Bunny to play well. But the advantage Ocean Breeze Luluka has is if you run her on like a high effortless build with some hybrid effectiveness, when Conqueror S3s, you can strip the Landy, blind her, and put silence. And then if you have the hybrid build, you can also sometimes land on something like a Death Dealer Ray. So she plays really well on a hybrid build into units like Death Dealer Ray, Conqueror, and Candy. And I've kind of forced my opponent's hand on where they're going to have to pick another cleanser. Otherwise, it's pretty much always going to be a losing scenario for them. And then I think the current thing people are doing is where they'll pick like multiple. They'll pick the Conqueror for the Vigor, and then they'll pick like an attack buffer alongside a dual attacker here. So they'll pick something like a Moon Bunny, and then in this case scenario, let's say my opponent doesn't go for like a dual attack and they go for like a force ban pick. Like I think something that would be force ban for me would be something like a Janua here, because my draft completely loses to Janua, especially since if it's like an ER Janua that can resist my Ambitious Tywin, I think it can be a really, really losing scenario. So they've kind of forced me to ban Janua, and they're getting Vigor buff, attack buff Landy through the draft. And then what I want to pick here is I want to pick a unit that is like a similar to Ocean Breeze Luluka, where she can also disrupt something like a Death Dealer Ray, Ambitious, or Navy Captain Landy and Conqueror. So I would pick something like the Dragon King Sharoon here, because she also brings something like a strip, and then she also brings some kill potential with the defense breaks on something like a Landy, DDR, Moon Bunny. And she does a lot to make it so my opponent can't just like ban my main cleanser and then just kind of destroy me with DDR sleeps, the injury, and just kind of take over the game because I'll lose a turn from being CC turn 1. So I've kind of picked two units that support Lone Crest and Bologna real well, and then I'll of course pre-ban the Genoa, which is a force ban, and then a lot of the time I think people would look to ban Mitt here because it's not, you don't really get any use from banning either of these two, since I have like a backup in case one gets banned. So they'll look to ban Mitt and just kind of brute force the game with high roll Landy. But I think you're always in a winning scenario when you draft like this, because you get defense buff from the Ocean Breeze Luluka. If Death Dealer Ray presses F3, your Sharoon will proc. And then let's say, for example, he doesn't ban Aether and he opts to ban the Sharoon. Then that's where like the hybrid build Luluka comes into play, because he's got no cleanse on his side. So if he gets blinded and silenced on something like a DDR and the Moon Bunny, it's pretty much over right after that. So this is showing you how you can play Laia in what would usually be a disadvantageous matchup because my opponent has banned a unit that people use to kind of counteract Death Dealer Ray into Laia, and then they first pick DDR, kind of putting me right on the spot where I either give them Laia DDR or I take Laia in a spot where she's not favored. So this is showing you how you can counteract this kind of scenario where you're playing Laia first pick into a superior first pick unit from your opponent. So now I'm going to cover ways of playing against Laia first pick, and I'm going to cover two different methods, which is the first one is going to be an aggressive method around Conqueror Lilius, and then the second method is going to be a more turn two kind of turtle style method. So you can see in this first scenario is pretty much the same pre-bans as the first game, except this time my opponent is first pick. So they first pick Laia, and I think a unit like Conqueror becomes really strong here because we've banned out four openers who I would say are usually always faster than the Conqueror. And then my opponent's only option in terms of outspeeding is the Zeo. And I think Zeo Laia can do well, but I think it's quite a weak opening in the current meta because I think Laia is not a very good anchor since it can take 4 or 5 turns for her to get her skill 3 up. So I would say like most people won't go towards Zeo after first picking something like a Laia. And then you want to pair that with the usual culprits, which is either Death Dealer or Atywin. I like to do Atywin personally because I think Conqueror can also play really well into something like a DDR. And I think if you're playing aggressively, Laia DDR is not as tough to fight. I think it's only really tough when you're playing a turn two style. So I'll take something like an Atywin here. And almost always your opponent is going to take away DDR on 2-3 because if they give you DDR when you already have these two picks, I think it's pretty much already over from draft. And then they'll pair that with something like usually mitigation on 3. Common is everyone's go-to now because she provides the second most mitigation in the game, but she brings more utility but than something like an arrow who provides more mit, but the invincibility, the immunity that Common can bring is really, really strong right now. And I think Arrow would not be as good here because Arrow's mitigation can of course be stripped since Conqueror can strip Escort. And then the way you counter this is we basically need an anti-DDR support and an anti-DDR DPS. So what I like to do here is I will pick Dragon King Sharoon. I did I showed before how it can be advantageous to play like Candy on 3 and then you pick like Kitty Clarissa, Camilla. That's a draft that's going around and very popular right now, where you just play for like candy dual attacks, skill through your opponent turn two, and just end the game instantly. But I think that style can be very unreliable because it's really, really RNG. It's pretty much heavily based on how much your candy Albris is. And if you're low rolling Albris, if you're low rolling counters, you can just lose the game way too easily. So I go for a more consistent approach where I won't put my candy on 3 because I don't want to kind of solo depend on my candy. I would still pick candy here alongside Dragon King Sharoon, but I've set myself up where I can also pick another DPS on 5 if I feel candy won't be enough to win me this game. And then almost always you're gonna end up fighting like another. We mentioned how strong Luluka can be here, and I think she's a really up and coming unit right now. And then they'll pick her alongside. I think a unit I've seen some people pick here is the newly buffed Lethe because he's got 2 cleansers in his draft, and then the change Lethe got recently where you can't be countered when you skill 3 is really really massive because a lot of the time when you were playing Lethe previously, like you would skill 3 or you would S1 turn 1. If you get Arborist, you're already like 70-75% HP. Then when you skill 3, let's say the Landy high rolls and she counters again, in some scenarios your Lethe could just die like if the Landy high rolls too much. And I think the new EE helps a lot with that because you can basically know you'll almost always be able to get off your skill 2 and just kill off something like a Landy. And what I like to do here is obviously my opponent has picked 2 units that are very strong against Landy, so I can't just depend on Landy as my solo win condition anymore. Because let's say I picked another support for Landy, they could just ban Landy or ban something like an A Tywin who's my only cleanser. So I like to pick another DPS on 5 here, and I think a really, really strong pick here would be something like a Specimen Says, because I've got Dragon King Sharoon, so he can't just sleep me with something like a Death Dealer Ray. And then I've got 2 stunners in the draft who Spez interacts really well with because he gets the 100% defense pin when he S3s a unit that's stunned. And I think Spez is a really strong answer into units like Laia and Lethe because they can struggle to kill him. A lot of people running on the Moonlight Dreamblade artifact, so if they hit him and they miss, he just gets attack buff. And then I'll usually be looking to ban out something like the Ocean Breeze Luluka here because I've pretty much got no cleanse except for Atywin. So let's say they ban my Atywin and things go wrong, my Spez gets hit, my Landi gets hit. I'm pretty much fully debuffed right from turn one. And then most people would either ban something like A-Town or they'll ban like the specimen says here, but I think either way you're really fine because I, for example, run like a really high HP Landy build. I'm like 19, almost 20k. So if I have mitigation, the Lethe is not going to be able to kill me unless she lands the frostbite. But I've got so much control where I feel like I can be confident against something like a Lethe. So this is showing you a more aggressive style draft you can do into something like a Laia first pick, where you don't always have to go slow with like a DDR Atywin. Unit like Conqueror can become really good when you have so many openers pre-banned. So the last game I'm going to cover here is going to be fighting Laia first pick from a more turn 2 standpoint. I've already filled out a little bit of the draft here and I've included artifacts because I think it's going to be really important for the draft I'm about to do. So we've got same pre-bans as my first game except I'm the second pick perspective this time. My opponent first picks Laia. I go for the Death Dealer 8 Tyrant response because I think this is the best response you can be doing right now because you this chokes them down to having to play like a knock-all led draft. Otherwise, it's way too easy for A-Tywin and DDR to just completely take over the game against Laia first pick. So my opponent almost always will go for like light or knock-all, sorry, plus either Moon Bunny or mitigation. So I think the current trend right now is where they'll go Moon Bunny on 2 into knock-all on 3 because a lot of Moon Bunnies right now are running the Soul artifact from Begida. So when they use the non-attack skill on their Moon Bunny, they get 20 souls and then they can soul burn their Knockwall. And the way I've found out is good for countering that is you go for Bellion on 3 because if you run a 3F Bellion, she can be your solo DPS in a game like this. So you can just go supports if you want on 4-5. And then you're denying the souls with Bellion skill too. So that Moon Bunny soul artifact win condition is already gone. And then I think a really underrated factor is Bellion brings AoE to the draft. So she can take away something like Knockwall's Guiding Light, strip barriers from something like a Moon Bunny. So Bellion is just a really strong unit right now, and then she interacts really, really well with DDR since she's applying injury in an AoE, similar to A Tower in skill 3. And then I like to pair her with something like an Urban Shadow shoe here because I personally run my shoe on the Sweet Miracle since I'm fortunate enough to have two of them. So since I run her on Sweet Miracle, something like a Knockwall becomes a lot less effective because whatever debuff she applies turn one, my shoe will cleanse away turn one since I'm getting the Sweet Miracle proc and then I'm taking a turn. So that's 2 turns of debuffs gone. And she's also another unit where she brings more injuries. So I've kind of backed up my DDR pick where in a case where like my DDR were to get banned, I can still injure the Laia and take away that win condition from my opponent. And then what I've seen some people do here is I've picked Bellion on 3, so that's ruled out the like double book unit on 4-5. But some people will still opt to pick something like a Fumir because he's got a red and a green unit, and Fumir doesn't need like soul burns to 2 turn sleep your team and store long enough for a unit like Laia to get her skill 3 up. So they'll pick Fumir and then they'll pick like I've seen some people pick like Navy Captain Landy or AU Fiend here, which is like doesn't really flow with their draft, but it's like a separate win condition they can have where either they get the Fumir through or if they high roll on something like a Landy, they can win that way. So I'm always going to be looking to ban the Fumir here because he's got a red and a green unit, as I said, and Fumir, when she gets that proc, it's too much of a tempo loss for your opponent if like all their units get slept. And then I want to pick a unit that stops like my ambitious Tywin getting banned here. So I want to pick like an usually it's like a high ER cleanse unit. So something like a Destina can work if you run her on a high ER build. Of course, next season is going to be a unit like Frida, but we don't have access to that this season. So any high ER cleanser can work. Maid Chloe if you have her available. I think the most popular one and the one a lot of people are likely to have geared is something like a Destina. Elena can also work, but if you have her on a high ER build, so you just want to pick any high ER cleanser you know will be able to resist the knock wall and then cleanse the bind from your team. So almost always like they're either gonna ban the shoe away or ban your cleanser away. So what I see some people do is they'll ban away like whatever cleanser you pick, and then I think you're always gonna have a winning draft no matter what they ban. I think that's like the hallmark of a when you've won the draft is where no matter what your opponent banned, you are still favored to win in that scenario. So whatever he bans here, with a billion on three, I've completely kind of shut down most of his win conditions. Where the only one he has left is like a landy, really really high rolling the game. But that does happen, but it's very, very unlikely. So this is showing you how you draft against Laia from a more turn two perspective, where we're anticipating what my opponent is trying to do. Where once I see something like a Moon Bunny Knockwall, I know they're going for like a Soul Burn Book Knockwall win condition, stall long enough for Laia to win the game, and I take that away with Billion plus Shoe. And you're basically just anticipating picks and preparing yourself to counter pick those. So second pick is all about like picking good counter picks and like units that are really hard to counter for your opponent. So this is just showing you how you play against Laia first pick from a second pick perspective. So overall, I think Laia is one of the strongest units in the game for sure at the moment, and I think knowing how to draft well with her and then draft well against her is going to be a really important part of any climb you're looking to do this season, whether it's climbing to Masters for your skin or climbing up to Legend for your RTA frame. And I think the glue of that is going to be, of course, Sweet Miracle. This artifact is like, I would say, honestly, the strongest artifact in the game right now. I think it's so, so, so strong with how when you put it on cooldown, it just it makes Laia pretty much just a normal cleanser. That's why a lot of people their strategy into Laia is like blow the Sweet Miracle turn one and then look to take advantage of her on her next turn. So I hope this video has given you an idea of how strong Laia's kit is and how you can look to utilize different combos with and against her to try and boost your climb this season. That's going to be all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'm going to see you guys in the next video.